Raz, dva, tri, raz, dva, tri.
Šestka nejde v jej.
A počkaj, teraz ja ju skúsim. Teraz som ja na šestke. Ja som na šestke, neviem, tuším sa v ušoch nepočujem, počujem sa ja v ušoch, ale menej, takže neviem, ako to bude vyzerať, keď bude originál. Lebo ja nemám také fajnové sluchatka, ako má Henrietka. Dobre, vypínam.
V sociálne riadenom štáte sú dielne úhľadné. Áno, poobzerali sa monsignor okolo seba a bolo na nich vidno, že sa im to, čo vidia, páči. Dielňu tak zariadiť, aby na cudzieho účinkovala dojmom útulnosti, lahodnosti a účelnosti. Otvoriť oči, vidieť závady, nedostatky a vnášať ľudskosť všade. Šikovne umiestnená kvetina, obraz alebo socha vždy pôsobí dojmom príjemnosti a sviežosti. I v robotníkovi musí byť jemnocit. Bez neho by bol len ťažným zvieraťom. Otvoriť oči, špinu von, s láskou pracovať.
Dobre, teraz šestku počujete? Šestku počujete?
Áno.
Šestku počujete?
Áno.
Áno, šestku počujete? Idem na päťku.
Vy ste, že ste tu, lebo chcete pracovať, obrátili sa, monsignor, k zhromaždeným ženám. Predovšetkým k matke a k pani lekárnikovej. Usmiali sa a zodvihli prst.
Skúška na šestke, kanál 6.
Áno.
Počujete kanál?
OK.
Takže národ nechce, ale musí poslúchať. V ženách až tak heglo, ale monsignor sa usmiali a dodali. Nič sa však nestalo, lebo viem, ako ste to mysleli. Keď ste povedali, že chcete, chceli ste dať najavo, že musíte. Ba čo viac, musíte, lebo chcete. Povedali tak milo, až nám všetkým odľahlo. U Sidónie, v krajčírskom salóne mojich sesterníc, sa zišlo veľa z tých bánovských a trenčianskych žien, pre ktoré šili. Tento raz prišli preto, aby sa aj oni samé zapojili do šitia. Pravda, nebolo treba náročné strihy a rafinované stehy ovládať, ani komplikované vzory viazané paličkovacou technikou. Onuce obendlovať, rukavice uštrikovať, šály vystrihnúť a tiež len tak ľahko sfercovať, o to šlo. To sa prišli pani doktorové, lekárnikové, doručovateľové, manželky čalúnikov, stolárov a hodinárskych majstrov, ale aj poštové, mestské a štátne úradničky naučiť. Pekne im to išlo. A bola to nanajvýš záslužná činnosť, lebo zima v 40. bola na skutku krutá. Sidónia aj Matilda ženy chválili, ale ja myslím, že len preto to tak dobre šlo, lebo sa na ne prišli pozrieť monsignor. Varil sa čaj, podajední si ho dávali so šípkovým lekvárom, iné zase s rumom a cukrom. Monsignor si dali ten druhý. Pravda, že čo si má čo dospelý chlap a ešte k tomu prezident republiky lekvárom lepiť vnútornosti, povedala matka, celá uveličená, keď už všetko skončilo a v salóne sme ostali len my dve, pani lekárniková a Sidónia s Matildou. Vidíš, ako dobre sme urobili, že podnik prešiel do tvojich rúk. Obrátila sa pani Mária na matku, kým sme upratovali, čo po ženách, ktoré sa do balíčkovej akcie ženského odboru Slovenskej hlinkovej ľudovej strany zapojili, ostalo. Sidónia s Matildou na to nepovedali nič, len sklonili hlavy a dali sa ešte tuhšie do roboty. Šálky a lyžičky a kadde tade pozabúdané koláčiky, aj poháre s nedojedeným lekvárom. Rumu neostalo, zasmiali sa ženy. A ja som to pochopila, lebo manželky bánovských mešťanov boli rečné za každým a všade. Ale takú vravu, aká sa v salóne strhla po monsignorovom odchode, takú som zažila iba v Trenčine na stanici, keď rukovali odvedenci rukujúci na východný front. Alica na čajovom večierku nebola. Nebola ani doma. Nebolo jej už niekoľko týždňov, takže bolo ľahké splniť jej želanie a vyhnúť sa jej. Lebo jej nebolo v celom meste. Pýtala som sa Matildy, kde je, ale tá len pokrčila ramenami a vystrašene pozrela na staršiu sestru. O Alicu sa ty neboj, povedala táto a usmiala sa. Ale tak ako si smutne a čudne. Ešte som u nej taký úsmev nevidela. Bola som u nich od tej rúvačky so sesternicou po prvý raz a aj ja sama som bola pred ňou neistá, lebo som nevedela, či sa na mňa nehnevá za ten lístok, že som jej ho neukázala a nepovedala, čo na ňom bolo napísané. Ale asi sa nehnevala, lebo mi stihla pošepnúť, aby som sa netrápila, že ja za nič nemôžem. Nemala som možnosť vypytovať sa viac, lebo pani lekárniková ma pred všetkými zhromaždenými ženami oslovila menom a pekne ma popýtala, aby som im zopakovala, čo povedali monsignor o tom, aké je pekné sedieť pri Božích nohách. Sociálnou akciou touto naše ženy nehovejú móde. Prevravela som pohotove, lebo som presne vedela, že toto sa našim ženám bude páčiť. Aj som to monsignorovi povedala, že tieto podobenstvá vedia vyberať veľmi pekne. Ľudia ich počúvajú radi a aj tomu rozumejú, dodala som. Monsignor sa len usmiali a pokračovali v diktovaní. Nuž i ja som pokračovala, keď to pani lekárniková chcela znova počuť. Slovenské ženy nevedie svrblivosť verejného vystupovania. Neženú sa za osobnou slávou. Sedia u nôh veľkej idei lásky k Bohu a k blížnemu. Uplatňujú praktické možnosti tejže na príslušníkoch svojho národa a nie len, že v rodoláske vychovávajú svoje deti a obetujú svojich synov na obranu vlasti. Ale strana má v nich i veľkodušné Samaritánky, ktoré slzami súcitu zalievajú rany sociálnych nedostatkov. Na stráž. Monsignor to vedia tak oduševnene podať, vzdychla pani lekárniková. Ale aj ja som to musela povedať pekne, lebo som to už počula toľkokrát, že som vedela aj, kde robia monsignor prestávku v reči, kde sa nadýchujú a kedy hlas stíšia, aby potom mohli prejsť do hromového hlasu. Tak to malo najlepší účinok. A keby som to nerobila dobre, pani lekárniková by sa isto hneď aj ohlásila. Ohlásila sa, ale pre iné. A ešte o tých rukách, o slovenskom ume a šikovnosti našich rúk, o tom nám rozpovedz, Anička. Nevedela som si hneď spomenúť, ktoré monsignorové slová mám zopakovať. Lebo hoci ma už vopred pani Mária požiadala, aby som si dobre zapamätala všetko, čo budú monsignor hovoriť, o šikovných rukách hovorili počas toho čajového večierka viac raz. A ja som bola zmetená z toho, o ktorých šikovných rukách si to chcú znovu vypočuť. Ale pomohla mi matka. Švacla ma onucov, čo mala práve v rukách. Nuž som si spomenula, že to bude asi tá pasáž, kde sa hovorilo o vyšívaní a Adolfovi Hitlerovi. To mi ale monsignor nediktovali. Zapamätala som si to len z počutia. Pomohla som si teda, ako som vedela. A spomenula som si, že hovorili, ako je dobré usilovať sa rodiť a usilovne pracovať, aj keď sme len ženy. Ale aj tie majú svoje miesto v našom štáte, čo je vidno aj z toho, že slovenské želanie jubilujúcemu ríšskemu kancelárovi, ktoré monsignor pripomenuli vlastnými slovami. Prosíme Boha, aby pánu Adolfovi Hitlerovi dal dlhý život, silu a úspech Aby na základe tohto princípu, v ktorom si zakladáme aj my, národ slovenský, lepšiu budúcnosť, v ktorej má vládnuť rovnosť, právo a spravodlivosť, mohol ďalej pracovať a bojovať za svetový mier a za vnútorný pokoj národov. Toto želanie, tento úprimný vinš bol podporeným darom našich slovenských rúk a slovenského umu, a totiž krásnou detvianskou výšivkou a pozdyšovskou keramickou vázou, ktoré budú iste jednou z najkrásnejších ozdôb pre vodcu Veľkého Nemecka. Uveličenie pani lekárnikovej po vydarenom podujatí konanom v krajčírskom salóne mojich sesterníc bolo naozaj veľké. Ženy sedeli ešte dlho do noci a popíjali čaj, ale už si ho nedochucovali šípkovou zaváraninou, lež pekne po chlapsky, rumom a cukrom, a niekoľkokrát si aj pripili na monsignorovo zdravie. Vysoko oceňovali ich takt a uznanlivosť voči slovenským ženám. Jeden pekný príklad hneď uviedla moja matka. Našla ho v novinách. Veď kde inde začula som Matildinu poznámku. Každoročné oceňovanie mnohodetných matiek rozprestrela matka Slováka a ukázala na fotografiu nadpísanú titulkom, ktorý hovoril o láske k vlasti povýšenej nad lásku osobnú a materinskú. Práve v súvislosti s tým, ako slovenskí bojovníci počas tejto krutej zimy strádajú v bojoch proti bolševickým diablom a prinášajú aj najvyššie obete, je nesmierne cenné, že prezident republiky dokáže tieto zaslúžilé ženy povzbudiť v ich často viacnásobnom žiali pekným štátnym vyznamenaním. Uzatvorila svoj prekvapivo ucelený a rozumný diskusný príspevok matka. Príjemne ma to prekvapilo a pomyslela som si, že na tých školeniach v Trenčíne sa na ňu predsa len čosi nalepilo a že Alica sa možno pomýlila, keď sa jej zazdalo, že ju vidí sedieť s cudzím gardistom.
Dobrý večer. Ingrid Timková.
Good evening, Ingrid TIMKOVÁ and Boris Lenko. May I thank my friends and colleagues for opening this evening in a very pleasant, interesting way by bringing to you parts of the book on chess with TISO. I would like to say a few words about this book. When I started to write it, I decided that the figure, the main character, inspired by Joseph TISO, and which is called Joseph TISO, will not speak in a different language than Joseph TISO himself really did. You have had now an opportunity to get acquainted with his perception of the role of a woman in Slovak society. And I'm not sure whether there is someone in Slovakia today who would subscribe to this role of women in society. That I can't say, but I'm sure that here in this room, nobody would accept this role of women. And there is another thought I have, and that is that Adolf Hitler had a vase from Slovakia in his office, and I couldn't stop me laughing. And maybe he had a vase like that in his room to break it when something went wrong. Today is 14th of March, and maybe we should recall what Adolf Hitler said on Joseph TISO. This Slovak priest can only say yes and amen. And that is the beginning of the Slovak War Republic, the Slovak fascist state. And that is also our past, that's also our history. And I was asked by the organizers to say a few words on why is fascism making a comeback. I believe that it's not an issue of a comeback. It is not an issue of being modern. It is only a flash. What could be so modern about an ideology which is based on the oppression of others? It's an atavistic ideology, but as a fashion having its comeback, it's dangerous because the weakest groups of the population, the least self-confident people are very susceptible to it. It's a fashion that is self-mutilating, and I am sure that society has a power to offer those who have this tendency to yield to deviation of any kind, that society has the opportunity to offer them something more attractive and a better fashion, a modern fashion. And I wish all of us to cope with this challenge. It is not a job for someone there high of left-overing or somewhere else. It is a job for everyone, for each of us. Thank you.
Dobrý večer, dámy a páni.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a public announcement. This is an event not paid by George Soros. This is an event of freely thinking people who came on a voluntary basis and they are not paid by anyone. I am the director of Open Society Foundation, which is behind all these events we experience in this country in these days. However, I can only say that our budget is not enough to pay for all these events. We have a chapter, 125 million from the budget of the Ministry for Education, which is not enough to pay for our activities, so it wouldn't be enough to pay a coup d'etat. What I like to see is that the young people who organize this, I know everyone who organized it. I know the woman who is 7 months pregnant and her husband, who have organized all these demonstrations and activities and events in cities of Slovakia. The cities in Slovakia act individually, independently. So we see this deep movement in Slovak society, and I'm very happy that we have now this opportunity to encounter our presence when we discuss our past. That here we stop and ask how to continue. We are here for decent Slovakia, for Jan and for Martina, and that's a very strong message for me, because we have now the week of school leaving exams. In the morning I was in Trencin and I had 250 students sitting in front of me in a hall, and we started a discussion on what's happening, and then we watched the film by Matěj Minář on Nicholas Winton. It's a 1-hour documentary on a man who saved almost 700 Jewish children from Slovakia and the Czech Republic. The whole audience was in tears, and I think that to manage have 250 teenagers quiet and watching and not playing with their mobiles is an achievement. And after the 1 hour, 10 of them wanted to continue a discussion with me. And they all told me that they will come on Friday again to demonstrate, because that's probably the only way how you can express your dissatisfaction or feeling ashamed for what our leadership does, how they perform. So I remember when I was 23 and I joined the events in November '89, I feel this spirit that we all want to be friends again, and we all want to smile, and we want to be different from those who are grumpy on the other side. And they should stop to be grumpy and should be able to say sorry, and they should go there where should they get a sentence for what they did. And this country is a country of all of us. I see still a problem, however. It is an opportunity that we stop to play cultural wars. And regardless of different issues which are alive and in the air, the highest priority is to be decent to each other. And we should share the ideas on how Slovakia should be. When I came on my way to Trencin, I was listening to one of the guests who are coming now to the stage. And Mr. Havran will be moderating the discussion. You for sure know him, so it will be his show, and his guest, ELISABETH Åsbrink, is a writer living in Sweden with Hungarian roots, and she opened the issue of the CEO of IKEA, who was in his youth a Nazi. And when she started to write about it, almost the whole country was against her, saying, "Don't touch our icons." And I think it is the job of us all the citizens, to touch the icons, to be sure whether the place the icon has is what she deserves or what he deserves. Maybe they have sometimes made also some mistakes or errors. And I'm sure that our guests will answer the question, why is fascism making a comeback? I hope you will have a nice and pleasant evening. I'm happy that you came in such numbers. And I wish you a good evening, spiritual experience, And if we are not seeing us tonight anymore, I'm sure that we will all meet at 5 o'clock Friday afternoon in the squares. Thank you.
Pardon. Dobrý večer.
Good evening to all. We have a new Prime Minister, Pellegrini. If you don't know, I'm sure that you all are happy. But today is not a day to be happy from Italian Prime Ministers in Slovakia. And I'm not meaning it as a chauvinist, of course. We have a date which is a very difficult date, a difficult issue to talk about in Slovak society. I don't know whether you have been today at Šafarik Square. There was a group of people who were singing to honor the Slovak war state. And I realized once again that we have fellow citizens here in Slovakia who have still an emotional link with that period of our history. And it's not historical or negative, no, it's a positive link, because if somebody has this need to sing in the square and to manifest the joy over that period, I would say it's a diagnosis. The working language of tonight will be English. I think you've been already instructed, but I would like to ask you to take your headsets for the case you don't like British English. And there is simultaneous interpreting into Slovak provided. So if you need headsets, please do it now so that we have a discussion uninterrupted. And I hope that we will also manage to have some space for questions to our panelists. I'm sure that you know all of them, or at least almost all of them. I was told to change my position, so I do so. From the United Kingdom, Professor Roger Griffin. From Sweden, Miss Elisabeth Åsbrink, and after our show, she will be here to sign her book for those who want. And one of the most important contemporary writers, ABDELKADER BENALI from the Netherlands.
Hello. I know you. Yes, I know. Témou dnešnej diskusie.
The topic of today is a theme which we maybe discuss in Slovakia in a larger extent than other countries, though it's an issue discussed everywhere at various levels, and the approaches differ. That will be the issue tonight. And what we know about Slovak fascism is that we ascribe to it features which are linked with social failure, ostracism, with the feeling that the world in which we live we don't understand. And on the opposite end, we have also people who come here to tell us how contemporary fascism and populism looks like in other European countries, so that we avoid this cliche that the 14th of March is the day when we commemorate the establishment of the Slovak Nazi state. And today, the 14th of March, is a day when Fico, our Prime Minister, was replaced by a new Prime Minister, Mr. Pellegrini. But I am not going to continue in Slovak to bother our guests and force them to listen to the interpreting. I will switch into English, but before doing so, I will thank you for coming here tonight. It seems that today fascism is not the hottest issue in Slovakia. The hottest issue is the current events, and we see
You have some music, Roger? So, thank you very much for coming. And as you know, we are going to debate the problem of the relation between the modernity and fascism. And you're here because on the 14th of March, we have proclaimed in this country a very strange alternative kind of state, which didn't last, but managed to shorten the lives of many people in this country. Most of the Jewish people who were engaged in the resistance and the others. And now we were already talking about this afternoon, but the new question for you today and this evening is, do you see any parallel between the political situation in early 30s in Europe and today's situation regarding the situation or political success of Wilders in Holland, the revelations you have written, Elizabeth, in your books about the Swedish society, and you, Roger, who you are still working on the relations between the modernity and fascism. And I will maybe start Elizabeth. Please.
Well, I think there are parallels to the Weimar Republic time, and I think there are parallels to the post-war years, just after the war, but I do not think that the 30s is a relevant comparison for us to make. What's interesting with the Weimar years is, for instance, that they tried the democratic system. It was very questioned. And for instance, they had a very well-developed hate speech law. So if you were the subject of hate speech, you could go to trial. And what happened was that a lot of, Julius Streicher and Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, kings of propaganda, they knew this law, of course, and they broke it on purpose, time and time again. And the people who were subjected to hate speech, mostly Jews, they went to trial. And each time they went to trial, the Nazis actually lost the legal battle, but they won the propaganda battle, because they made the trials to scenes and they made the walk to prison into big demonstrations. So they knew that all publicity was good publicity. That's Goebbels' main thesis. So I think this is interesting to keep in mind today. I don't think it's a direct parallel, but I think it's interesting.
Elizabeth, does it mean that the legal system maybe is not able to protect us, right?
Well, I think the legal system can protect us, but we have to also know that these, in Sweden, for instance, we have Nazis on the street now, and violent racist Nazis, but I believe in not forbidding them from demonstrating. And
Why?
Because of several reasons. We should not give them a separate treatment, but we should not give them extra attention. Thank you. And you have to choose your battles, and I think we should be aware of that. These people know exactly how to gain attention, because they see for every big story we make about them, they get some more supporters. So we just have to be cool, not afraid, but cool in how we deal with them.
How do you mean that, Elizabeth? Like you walking on the streets of Stockholm, you see a bunch of homeless Nazis because they're on the streets, right?
Well, they're on the street demonstrating.
Okay. And you are just staying cool, right?
No, of course, the individual, the Elizabeth, the mother, the person gets scared. But on the other hand, I have my history of the Holocaust, where my family was murdered. They were Hungarian Jews. And just because of that, I will not let a Nazi keep me quiet. They will not make me stop going to places or move around. They will not hinder me. So that just makes me more determined not to let them get the power over me or my life.
So this is the way you are fighting them, right? You are writing books about them.
Yeah.
Not only about them, but also about them.
Yeah. But this is difficult questions. We just had a debate in Sweden last autumn. We have a book fair, it's very popular, and at this book fair, a right-wing newspaper was allowed in. And that created a big turmoil, because a lot of writers didn't want to share the book fair with new, right-wing extremists. They weren't Nazis, but they're right-wing extremists. And they started a boycott of this book fair. And I, on the other hand, felt that if they are there, I have to go there. I have to go to the book fair to keep on the democratic talk, the activity as usual, democratic business as usual, because they shouldn't be allowed to disturb us.
But you started to talk about the parallels with Weimar Republic.
I'm sorry,
right?
I left the subject.
No, okay. But I will just let me remind you that you started to talk about Weimar Republic.
Yeah.
And the idea of Weimar Republic was just, let's have our usual democratic business, right?
Well,
and then we lost, right?
Well, there are several reasons the Nazis gained power, of course, but I just want to remind about this very interesting fact that hate speech laws, now a lot of people are demanding tougher hate speech laws, and I'm not sure that's the right strategy. So I just wanted to put that little historic fact into the discussion to make it more complicated.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure,
Okay.
anytime. Yeah.
So, Roger, please.
Well, I'd like to point out some big differences between the interwar period and now. The First World War had destroyed the faith of millions of people in liberal democracy, in progress, in the efficiency of Western civilization. There was a genuine sense that a civilization that could host, which could accommodate the First World War, there was something fundamentally wrong with it. That feeling created some wonderful art movements, wonderful jazz, wonderful surrealism and Dada, but at a political level it was a catastrophe, because liberalism had discredited itself. I don't think many people realize that in the 1930s in Washington, 40,000 members of the Ku Klux Klan marched in Washington. This was a general crisis. And at the same time, there was an alternative vision of the future, which was associated with Bolshevism and with the Lenin project for a new Russia. So there were three rival ideologies. Now, in the 1980s, except for some very marginalized minorities, Bolshevism and, I would argue, equally Maoism have failed as systems, and fascism, though there are still fascists and there are still Nazis and there are still Ku Klux Klan, they are totally marginalized. The crisis we are experiencing is within liberal democracy. Really big issues about two basic things. One, within the European area, should this area of relative prosperity and freedom be just for Europeans? And can we open it up to the millions and millions of people whose lives are absolutely unimaginably terrible while we are sitting here? So one is about how far we create a fortress of Europe, a fortress Europe. And the other is within Europe, how do you deal with problems of pluralism? That every European country now, apart from actually Bulgaria, which has been remarkably good at stopping mass migration, every European country has many different communities of faith, of non-faith, different ethnicities, and different structural problems. And within each country, there are real issues about identity, about relating your personal identity to the EU or to the world. Many people come into the world and they have parents of different nationalities. There's problems of migration, there's problems of internal migration. Now, these two issues of identity and creating a fortress Europe, these are very, very different problems from the interwar period. So I would say that though when you start hearing about ethnic hatred or hating Muslims or whatever, it reminds us, because of the trauma of the interwar period, it reminds us of fascism. The problem is not fascism. The problem are real issues about access to prosperity, about hope, about identity. And I do believe that each nation has a very different situation, but all of us have to somehow come to terms with, make sense of our little existence within this bigger situation. But compared with the interwar period, go back and look at it. This is luxury compared with the early 1930s after the Great Depression. We do not know we're born compared with what was going on in Europe in the interwar period and in America.
ABDELKADER, is this the issue of identity? Yeah. What's going on here right now in Europe?
Well, I think when we talk about Europe, we try to see ourselves as this benign, enlightened continent that is an example of humanity. But and that's how we want to see ourselves. But it comes at a price, and the price is the fortress. I live part of the year in Tangier, north of Morocco. I have a Moroccan background, was born in Morocco. And when I'm in Tangier, I have a distance from my apartment, because I look over the city and then I see the Mediterranean Sea and I see Spain, and it looks very pleasant to me because I can take my passport and go to Spain and do some shopping there and come back in time for dinner. But when you're an immigrant, then getting into Europe is trying to get into a prison. It's trying to get into a prison where everyone is rich and you're poor, and you want to be part of that prison. And when you understand this, you understand why the Sub-Saharan, the Libyans, the Syrians want to get to this continent, because they know the moment they're in, they will be safe. And we tend to be negative about our continent. You know, we have had this economical crisis. The economical growth is 1.3%, not 1.5. Oh, whoa, whoa. But for people from the outside, and then our direct neighbors, we're not talking about people in Asia or Latin America, but our direct neighbors, Libya, Egypt, Syria, let's talk about Turkey. We are a beacon of peace and prosperity. But when you, then I will flip the coin to an immigrant who has been living in Europe for 42 years, almost 42 years, that's me. And when you look at Europe, it depends who you ask what Europe is. Because if you ask it to someone who lives in an affluent neighborhood with Dutch parents who for generations have been living there, then Holland is his country, and of course, but it's also his place of present and future. If you are Dutch, but you have a Jewish background, then you will talk about the Holocaust. You will talk about the Dutch as a people of maybe traitors, of people who, and if you are the son of an immigrant, then you feel in a way, you feel vulnerable. You will feel very vulnerable because not only is Geert Wilders using hate speech to create stereotypes of immigrants, to create stereotypes of Muslims. The moment Wilders is being brought to court, he was brought to court by a group of Muslim organizations. I was against it. They asked me, should this process be done? I was against it because, as you said, it was giving more publicity, more propaganda to Wilders. He could use the platform of the democracy, the Court of Justice, as a place of to turn himself into a victim. I saw this. I mean, this is what happens when populists go to court. They become the heroes in the eye of the people who are. But now I think it's good that these Muslim organizations went to court, because as an immigrant, this is part of becoming part of the democratical texture of the continent. It's becoming part of the continent of Europe, using democratical means, using the court to fight for justice, so that maybe even if you lose now, you can still tell your children or your grandchildren, like, we went to court for that. We fought for our ideals because we believed in the system. So that made me very positive. But I will go back to fascism in the 30s. Of course, there's no comparison because economical circumstances were totally different from now, etc., etc. But what you see in the rise of fascism in the 30s, the rise of populist movements, is that though in the beginning these ideas are seen about, the Übermensch, and they're seen as a bit lunatic, these are strange ideas about the pure race, etc. But slowly, they find their way to the mainstream, and suddenly, people in the mainstream, institutions in the mainstream, political parties in the mainstream, they use this vocabulary of the right wing of fascism to legitimize their existence. And this is actually happening in Holland too, and also in the rest of Europe, where 10 years ago, people like Wilders, Jean-Marie Le Pen, Farage in UK, they would talk about immigrants as second-rate citizens, as bringing moral pollution, those kind of things. And we would look at them and say, oh, there's strange people, what are lunatics? But part of that discourse has been taken over by the mainstream parties in Holland. Part of the discourse is being used by leaders of Christian Democrats, socialist and liberal parties. And I think that's where the real danger is for the European project.
ABDELKADER, what does it mean that the mainstream parties are finding the inspiration in this kind of trash speeches? What does it mean for you?
Well, it means for me that I lose faith in politics. I lose faith in my leaders. I lose faith in politics as a stable force in civil society. You can count on these parties for their decency. They're decent. You might not agree with them, but you still. You might not vote for them, but you still, in your heart, in your mind, you find them decent and you trust in them. But the moment that the socialist leader is saying things like, well, maybe Islam is the problem, or maybe saying, well, maybe we should do something about bringing back the influx of Muslim immigrants, then I lose faith in these political leaders. And deep in my heart, I'm also Machiavellist. I also know it's election time is coming. It's opportunistic. They have to use this, etc., etc. But when it comes to fascism and the idea of the pure race, the idea of the nation is one people, it's in the end not the fringe that is in a way accelerating this movement. It's the mainstream that's doing it.
When you hear the names Strache in Austria, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Marine Le Pen in France, and the others, do you think it's kind of the bad remake of history, or it's something completely different? Roger, Elizabeth, and then ABDELKADER.
Well, I'm not the good person to ask, because I have a very firm opinion here, okay? Because I've spent a lot of my academic life trying to define fascism. And so I've ended up with a definition which distinguishes between fascism and various forms of right-wing. So for me, there is a very big difference between populism and fascism.
Why it is important? Can you explain it later,
okay.
maybe?
Well, I'll tell you why it's important. Let's take President Trump. Well, let's not take President Trump. But let us try to think about President Trump. What is really significant to me is that two things. One, when Trump came up and the media started focusing on him, actors like Clooney, a whole load of journalists, satire programs, cartoonists started portraying him as Mussolini, as Hitler, and also as the leader of North Vietnam. In other words, he started being called a fascist. One. Two, the alt-right, the neo-Nazi fringe in America started welcoming him, so did the Christian right. Lots of people the liberals were calling him fascist, and people on the extreme right were welcoming him. But his discourse has nothing to do with interwar fascism. Interwar fascism, in my book, I mean literally in my book, I've written books about this, which my students find very difficult, but they're there, says that fascism is a revolutionary movement which attempts to replace liberal democracy with a new regime based on an extreme form of nationalism. It is not possible to accommodate real fascism within a party political system. In fact, the first thing that Mussolini and Hitler did when they got into power was to dismantle the system. Now, unless I've missed a tweet, which is possible, Trump has never ever asked to dismantle the constitutional system. He might want to have another term as president, but he has not tried to do what's happened in China now and say, I want to change the law, I will be a perpetual president. He has not tried to change the educational system and set up mass organizations to create a new type of American. He is essentially nostalgic for a certain myth of America as white and self-contained, without migrants, without Muslims, etc. He's racist, he's misogynist, I think he's got serious mental problems, but he is not a fascist. And the difference is very important, because if we look at, say, Putin, when the Soviet Empire collapsed, there were Western experts saying, the chaos of Russia will produce, this is like the 1930s, this will produce fascism. Look at Zhirinovsky. But they were looking at Zhirinovsky. But an ex-KGB Soviet, Putin, has actually corrupted Russian democracy. And he's done things like invade Crimea, and he's hosted extreme nationalism in Russia without fascism. The danger to modern liberal democracy doesn't come from fascism. It comes from corruption within liberal democracy. Now, I believe that Slovakia has one or two problems with corrupt politicians. If you
Not
look
anymore, Roger.
that's good.
We have a new prime minister.
A new dawn is breaking. A new world is emerging, which will probably last till Friday or Saturday. Yeah, but my point is a serious point. You do not need to be a fascist to be a horrible person. You do not need to be a fascist to corrupt democracy. It is the internal corruption of democracy that scares me more than fascists. It is the way democracy creates corrupt elites. In Britain, we've had big revelations about how much money is in this is legal corruption. It's hidden away in the Caribbean. It's hidden away. We've got various ways. We're finding out about all sorts of scandals about how people are paid in big companies, etc. These are the things that frighten me. A corruption of liberalism from within. Part of that is populism.
But is it inherent to liberalism? Is it something we have to count on? With the idea that the liberalism has these seeds of corruption in it.
Well, I think there was a very interesting argument within Greek philosophy. Is it better to have good laws or good men, or good people? Now.
Thank you.
Well, but the Greeks said men. Okay, the women were doing the washing up and the shopping and things like that.
It's like me too for Socrates, right?
Now, the argument goes that when you have bad politicians, you need good laws. But what you really want is good people and good laws. So you need a very good legal system. Now, my point is that populism is more dangerous than fascism because it's not as extreme. It does not say we want a revolution. It does not say let us kill millions of people. But what it does is create a system which operates like the South African Republic of apartheid. If you are a certain sort of person, you have all the benefits of the system. But if you're of the wrong race or the wrong social group, or if you're a migrant, or if you're disabled, or if you're a woman or whatever, you do not have access to. So liberalism has to constantly be improved and struggled for and democratized, because left to itself, it is always going to be used by elites and turned into a perversion of itself.
Is this the actual danger in Europe, this kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I find it interesting. The interwar period was so traumatic in our history, especially here and in Eastern Europe, that we're still talking about fascism. But I'm much more interested in the terrible corruption of liberal democracy in the 20th century. And I think it's going to, that is what we, next year, when you have another day, don't talk about fascism. Look at the way you've got good laws, you've got good constitutions, you've got lots of idealistic young people, you've got good teachers and TV producers and everything, but you've got lots of very corrupt, egotistic, selfish people who are destroying democracy from within. And they don't wear Nazi uniforms, they wear suits and ties, and they speak very good Slovak language, but they are...
Not all of them, Roger.
They are the danger, okay?
Elizabeth, please.
Well, yes. No, I think this is of course very important, and I've read your definition of fascism, and that is my lead when I look at things. Does this match with Roger Griffin's definition of fascism? So, but I just want to add, I've just written a piece about Hungary. There's an election in Hungary in April, and the word, I mean, we all know that Viktor Orban himself describes his rule as illiberal democracy. And also that the Swedish Popular Right-Wing Party, they have this as an ideal, and it's also the Putin way of ruling. And then we have, what is the result of this? Is this fascism? No, it's something else, and it's a word that's been around for about 10 years. It's soft I can never say that.
Soft authoritarianism.
Yeah, this is a terrible word, but please say it again.
Soft authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Say it in Swedish.
Soft, mjuk auktoritärt. Yeah. I can speak Swedish if you want that. It's something with authoritarian that just won't go. It's Freudian, I think. The Democrat in me doesn't want to say it. But anyway, so this is very interesting, because what is this? What does he do? Well, first of all, he goes against the democratic principle of keeping, for instance, the legal system separate from the politics. He appoints new judges that have a political agenda. And also the other pillar of democracy, the free media, that he has also taken control of. The media that were critical, they're shut down or bought up.
Putin.
Yeah, that's Putin, that's Viktor Orban. So from another point of view, I can only say I agree completely with this analysis.
Down a major university.
Yes, he closes down everything that he conceives as a threat. And at the same time, he goes on about immigrants. And Hungary has hardly any immigrants. There aren't any. I think there are about 2,500 immigrants the latest years that were let into the country. But he keeps the people obsessed with immigrants and goes on with his business. So this is what I fear from a Swedish Scandinavian perspective, because the right-wing party we have in Sweden are quite big, and they have Hungary as an ideal.
Oh, really?
Yes, oh yes.
As an ideal, right? Like, we want to be like Hungary.
Yeah, they think the cultural politics are great, for instance. When you take away all the bosses of the theaters and the publishing houses and put new ones there that are politically loyal. So it's a terrible scenario.
Abdelkader, what's wrong with democracy? Why there is so many voices telling that there is something corrupted with democracy?
Well, I think a liberal Western democracy is good when you're winning. I grew up just after the fall of the wall in Holland. My teacher of history, the day the wall fell in Berlin, the next day I was in history class, and I loved history, and I loved the teacher. And before he started, I think we were doing another failed revolution, the French Revolution, but before doing that, he said, before I say anything about the French Revolution, I want to talk to you about today, because you are living a historical moment. The wall fell yesterday, and you will be of a generation that will tell his grandchildren about that you were sitting in the classroom and your teacher told you that. And the idea was, of course, that it was a sign of hope. The idea was this means hope, because liberal democracy has conquered its biggest enemy, communism. For the last 50 years, it has conquered. Communism is dead. And now liberal democracy will do its work. Fukuyama, the end of history. And I plucked the fruits of that. You had the Erasmus travel boards. There were the borders were lifted. You could go to Budapest in one day. It was, things were cheap. We were working towards a unified European Union. Suddenly you wake up and it's 9/11. And I think 9/11 was for me the day that liberal democracy was found out that it was very vulnerable. That idea of power and optimism and indestructibility, thank God I can pronounce this word.
Don't say soft authority.
No, what I'm doing now is my whole talk is trying to avoid saying that.
So 9/11 was the end of history. It was when history came back.
We woke up
hit us in the face.
And we all said, what a mess.
Yeah.
What a mess we're in now. And the right answer, we immediately felt, it's not going to be a war, but there has to be war. We felt, so what you have now is, we don't want to go to war, but we have to go to war. We don't want to think about ideology, but we have to think about the ideology. And I think we lost a sense of direction. The issues of identity, belonging, religion became very, very important because the attack on the Twin Towers was explained as an attack on values, on identity. And I think we're still in this debate. We still did not figure out where we are, and after the wars of Iraq and Syria, there's no end to it. What I found out in my travels in Europe is that people, one side, feel European, but what they feel more instinctively is the sense of belonging. They want to belong to a family, to a nation. And I think that in the success story of the European Union, we liberal intellectuals, drinking cappuccino and eating croissants, we forgot to think about what does it mean to belong to a nation, and to think about it in a progressive way, to think about a nation being a place where you feel secure, where you feel safe, where you can grow together, where your family is safe and you can think about responsibilities, and where things like freedom and freedom of speech and freedom of religion, etc., are bound with the idea of the nation. And I think that the idea of nation and nationhood has been hijacked by the populist parties. I was in a couple of years ago, 2006, I was in Croatia, Zagreb, wonderful country, a great time. I was sitting with these two students of Dutch and in a bookshop, and I heard this shout of heavy metal. And I said, what is this noise? It sounds like bad music in Croatian. And they told me, oh, well, you don't want to know. Well, then I get curious. So I said, what is it then? And they told me, there's a big concert on the main square. There are now 100,000 people bringing the Hitler salute. I said, Hitler salute on your main square? Why? Because there's this neo-fascist heavy metal band. And suddenly I understood, whoa, why are we not talking about this? We're talking about Brussels. We're talking about unifying. But we're not talking about an undercurrent in Europe, which is very, very strong and gives rise to ultranationalism, because we are not man enough or people enough to define our progressive idea of what it means to be part of a nation.
But the idea, ABDELKADER, was that the nations were the main source of conflicts in Europe, right? So that's why we had this idea for many decades, that the concept itself of nations has to be overcome. And now you are saying that we have to go back somehow to the concept of the nation, right?
I think we have to go forward, always forward, and because even we talked about this this afternoon about the young people of the banlieue of Paris. They grew up in the banlieue. It's not a bad place to grow up, but it's being portrayed in the media as a very bad place to grow up because immigrant problems, etc., fundamentalism, etc. And the young people call themselves beurre. Butter, so a mishmash. And they hate France, they hate the flag, they hate Sarkozy, they hate everything what is so-called France, because it's associated with white and secular and privileged. So France for them is the place they will never arrive to. But when the national team plays, they're the first who shout out the Marseillaise. And the moment they are shouting this national anthem, it's almost as if they are internalizing the national anthem of France, turning it into some Boer song, like this is our song, it's a song of protest. We're proud of it, but it's a song of protest. And I think that's another definition of how you can define what it means to be citizen of a country. Because one way or another, we have to tell our children, people, what it means to be citizen of a country.
But is this the problem of populism only the problem of identity today in Europe? It's a question for you. Elizabeth, Roger, Elizabeth.
Well,
no, please, Elizabeth.
Well, no, what I see the problem of populism is the problem. And this is not an original analysis, so I won't pretend it, but But there is huge social and economic inequalities. And the globalized world makes us see them even more clearly. The globalization has increased the inequalities, that's one thing, but the other thing that globalization does is that we are aware of them. We are aware of that people in Stockholm they're having a much better life than the people, I don't know, in some city in Romania, maybe. So the view of oneself, the possibility of wanting another life, a better life, and becoming dissatisfied and maybe not feeling hope, that has increased, and that's always the base of populism, of course. So that is one aspect. And I want to add to what you're talking about concerning the nation, because nationalism doesn't have to be a bad thing. I agree with you on that. And I have this dream of changing Europe's way of looking at nationalism and citizenship, because it's based on how does one become a citizen in Europe. And in the most of European countries, it's based on blood, on heritage, on who your parents are. If your parents are this, you can become a citizen. But if we take the US or Canada, who are typical immigrant countries, and they also define themselves as immigrant countries, they have another principle for citizenship, and that is anyone who is born within the borders is an American. Doesn't matter where your parents come from, it's if you're born there, you're American. And this is a nationalism that I find much easier and even beautiful compared to the blood-stained European tradition.
You told us this afternoon when we were discussing this issue that this is a real legacy of Adolf Hitler, right?
Well, it's become, no, these ideals were actually the result of the French Revolution. They were very strong into the blood heritage. Only the really French could be French, and the children of the French could be French. And the interesting difference is that you put then it's if you use the Greek word ethnos in contrary to demos, that the group, the language, the culture is the priority instead of the citizen within the territory. So it's two different principles, and deep under, our societies are very affected of the way we look at citizenship, even here and now, I would say.
Okay, so this is another explanation for you, right? The social.
Yes, it is, and it's also a way of rethinking nationalism, that it doesn't have to be bad.
This is a very British story, right? When you travel to London and you go to the bookstores, you have a feeling that the British won the First and the Second World War alone.
Well, it's true, isn't it? I mean, we had a little bit of help from the Americans. They were late as ever. And the Russians made big sacrifices, but then they had the wrong sort of system. Whereas the British, from the start, we had the right system and we had the right leader, and he's just won an Oscar in Hollywood. Yeah, no, I mean, every country needs myths of specialness. Everywhere you go, I mean, my mother was a classic patriot. She thought English was objectively the most beautiful language in the world. Now, I have an Italian mother-in-law, and she is equally stupid about Italian. But I mean, she says English is ugly. Why do they put the adjective before the noun? That means there's something wrong with them. And when I say something in English, she does a parody. She does a Monty Python parody. And I love her for that, because she has this sense that, I mean, millions of Italians, they don't feel Italian, except in the World Cup. But they feel my mother-in-law is Genovese, and she speaks dialect, and then she's Italian, and she's patriotic, and she hates the French, and she hates the English, and she hates me because I married her daughter. But she has something really deeply rooted, and she's extremely generous and kind, and she's part of, and all over the world. I've been in Sri Lanka, I've met people like my mother-in-law and my mother in Sri Lanka. There's a wonderful documentary made by the BBC. What people probably know in Slovakia is that the SS in Nazi Germany were obsessed with stealing children who looked Aryan to increase the number of Aryans. And in Poland, they found a lot of children who looked Aryan, and they would take them to a testing center, and they would be tested for their Aryanness. And one test was how they sat. So if you sat like I sit, then you would end up in a concentration camp. But if you passed the Aryan test, you would be brought up by an SS family and turned into a German. Now, there was this case of a boy who was brought up by Nazis, and he had a Nazi father and mother, and he loved them because they were parents. And after the war, he found out that he had a Polish mother, and he went back to Poland to visit her. The Poles took his passport, and he couldn't go back to Germany. And so he stayed in Poland till his mother died. And now he teaches German in Poland, and he did this documentary. And he compared his two mothers, and he loved them both, he spoke Polish to them both, he compares the two personalities. And at the end of the documentary, he says, I'm making this documentary to show you how absurd it is, how mad it is to believe in racial superiority. When you can enter into different cultures, you find the same phenomena. Love is love, culture is culture. And he experienced this wonderful universality of humanity, which is turned into millions of dialects. There's a Slovak way of being and a Czech way of being. In Britain is interesting because we have so many ethnicities. And the first generation of Muslims who come to Britain, Bangladesh or whatever, are still very much rooted in but their children are going to university, they're becoming lawyers, they're becoming newsreaders, they're becoming rap artists, and they are creating new ways of being British. Now, one thing I like about America is if you talk to an American about their ethnicity, they have hyphenated ethnicities. I am Afro-American, I am Anglo-American, whatever. In Britain, linguistically, people still think of themselves as English. I'm not English, I'm Anglo-British. And there's many ways of being British. And once we accept that a nation like Slovakia can have many ways of being Slovak, and that we are all, there's ways of being uniquely Slovak, where you're part of a bigger thing called Slovakia, you're part of a bigger thing called Europe, part of a bigger thing called humanity, then we stop hating people and we become interested in the difference and the similarity.
Elisabeth.
Well, I was just...
I love you.
You'll have a special lecture this evening.
No, I was just thinking of this word you were using, patriot, which is a very interesting word because you can be a patriot in so many ways, and it's got nothing to do with a nation. You can be sort of close to your hometown, you can be in your culture and in your language, but the original meaning of it in the Swedish context in the 17th century, actually, or 18th century, when it came through from the French Revolution, it actually meant a person who wanted to do something good for the society. Yeah, the common good. It's connected to the words the common good. And this is also it's a beautiful ideal that we've sort of lost somewhere.
Well, you know, I love the identity politics, you know, this hybridated Afro-American, Latino, Puerto Rican, Romanian, wonderful. But the moment you have a society which defines itself into the extreme, into identities, then the second question is, what is then, what binds it together? What is the common good? And you find out that the moment you say, you are this, you are that, then also every group has its own interests, and they will always go into conflict with the interests of the other group. Look at in Holland, we have a big discussion about women in higher positions in finance and banking and the high echelons of that there are not enough women. So you have identity politics. We want more women. But the men are saying, but things are going all right. Things are working for the common good. The moment we are imposing more women on these positions, we will weaken the system. We will maybe make decisions that are not based on qualities, but on quota. And I think this is something we have to take into account when we talk about this utopia of that every identity is recognized in itself. Because you can do this, but at the same moment, you have to open discussion of what is your responsibility and what can you do for the common good? What can you do for the common good? Can you also, because not only do we teach our children who they are, where they come from, which is good, because when it comes to question about slavery, anti-Semitism, minorities, all these people have a right to be acknowledged in their history, in their pain, in their trauma. But the moment we recognize this, and you open the debate, you also have to open a debate about, but then what is your responsibility in the society as a whole? And we are struggling with it in Holland. We're struggling with it. It's not easy.
Well, it's all over Europe and the US. And the thing with the identity, the fixation with identities, maybe to be recognized for one's history. But when it goes on, I feel that in Sweden, the debate has become more of who is saying things instead of what are they saying.
Agency.
Yeah, agency representation has become very important, even more important than the arguments that are actually brought into the talk. So this is also, I think, a danger to democracy because it's anti-universal, the idea of universality.
This is the question. This is the question. What is the part of universalism in the idea of the nation, right? Because I will come back to the Slovak history, and it's very universal history of Second World War. The Slovak nation was more important than all the others for some political leaders here. So how can we do all the things you were talking about, the cooperation, the sense of togetherness, patriotism, like trying to do some good stuff for the others, when on the other side you think that you are better than the others?
Well, you learn you're not better than the others. I mean, if you, I was brought up in an extremely patriotic country. I was born in 1948. We had just won the war with a little bit of help. We just lost a lot of empire. I was taught to love the Queen and love English and love Shakespeare, and I even thought English food was good. I mean, I was totally brainwashed. At that time, we used to play good football, and then a certain Puskás from Hungary showed us that we couldn't play football, and we have never really played good football. Even when we buy foreign players and they play for Manchester United, it's a disaster. They come to us and they can't play football anymore. So I have gradually learned in my life...
Are you talking about Zlatan Ibrahimovic now?
No, not us. So... But
my Swedish sentence, yes.
I'd like to be serious. That I was brainwashed as a white male English child with an extraordinary degree of imperial racist arrogance towards other cultures. That's how we were brought up.
Did you believe to it?
No, well, I did. Yes, I did. I felt almost sorry for foreigners that they weren't English. Till I was... You know, I was very young. And in the course of my life, I have had to understand that my country historically has done terrible things. There's no such thing as good imperialism. There's no such thing as benign colonization. We did terrible things to African slaves. We fought terrible wars. We've colonized people. We did terrible things so gradually my sense of national pride has become smaller and smaller. And I've ended up, and especially being married to an Italian, women are good at putting men in their place. Italian women, I don't know about Slovak women, but they're very good at putting the male ego in its place. And I've ended up becoming part of a world community precisely because I no longer see Britain as my home. There are many things about contemporary Britain I am deeply ashamed of. I am ashamed of what we did in the Industrial Revolution, what we're doing to our younger generation who can never afford a home, what we did to the regions, the way we treated Scotland and Wales. And I have learnt all these things, and yet, I feel proud of the things I think we get right. And I feel ashamed of the things we get wrong. And every country I get to know well, and I speak several languages, there's the same mixture of beauty and crimes against humanity, of corruption and idealism. Babies are still amazing in their potential. There are global forces working against humanity. There are local forces. And I just see a common struggle, a common humanity. It's not a myth. It's not an abstraction. And I just know that in a way, there is a universal story that we are all part of. And we have to fight locally for global values. It doesn't matter where you are. Yeah.
Elizabeth, you wanted to add something, I think, no?
Well, no, not particularly
But you can.
to this, but I can. Well, what is the question? I think we'll have to go back to the question in that case.
The question is still the same, the tension between the idea of nation and the idea of universalism.
Well, I don't think there has to be a contradiction between the idea of the universalism and nationalism, because I see more the nation as a system of regulating the welfare for the citizens. It doesn't. Yes, it's very Swedish, but I am sort of. I am Swedish in a sense.
Is this a part of your identity today?
Well, this is interesting. I realized I was Swedish when I was 22. I'm born in Sweden. I was, according to my parents, I was also made in Sweden. But my mother was British. My father was Hungarian, and because of this blood-based citizenship, I was born as a Hungarian citizen. And then when my father became a Swedish citizen, I became that sort of as a fringe benefit. I was 1 year old. So, but my parents kept on talking about Sweden as another country. The Swedish food was there, the Swedish habits was this, the Swedish language, the Swedish system, so I never felt Swedish. The thing was, I never felt Hungarian or British either,
And
so
what
I
has
was in a
happened
limbo.
when you were 22?
In 22, I went to Egypt. I had a friend who worked she was an Egyptian university teacher, and she said, come to my university, to my classroom, and talk to my students so they can train English. So I was there like a sort of training object, and the first question from these students, boys and girls, about 18, 19, was, in Sweden, do you marry because of love or because of money? So it's a very good question. We marry because of love. Okay, but why do we do that? We do that because women can work, they can support themselves, they have the same right to inherit, they have the same possibility to vote, there is childcare so they can work, so they are independent, so they can choose a husband and vice versa, because of love and not because of money. And that was, of course, not the question for the Egyptian couples. They were under heavy strain of other values. So that's when I realized, whoops, I am really Swedish.
I will give you. I want to react on it, but you know, I was born in Morocco and I came to Holland when I was 4 years old. And the idea of Europe in Morocco is that in Europe you can be an individual, so people don't look at you as part of a group, but as part of an individual, and not only look at you as an individual, which for a Moroccan is strange because family is very important, but people understand that this individualism creates your freedom to study, to learn, and to become rich and famous. But they also understand that it's very, very important that the state, the European state, is protecting that individual. And it's very important because when we talk about Morocco, those countries, the state is not your friend. Never. We have the expression in Holland, de overheid is een schurk met een hoge hoed op. The government is a scoundrel with a high hat. So you have to be, in a way, we have to mistrust the state. Of course, we live in a liberal, democratic society. We have the police. We have judges. We can have a lawyer, etc. But we still have to mistrust. And very, very important in this, in the check and balance, in controlling, in making sure the state is not becoming a scoundrel that will trample you, is free press. Free press is very important. Free press is very important. Journalists, every day digging up the truth, digging up the filth, digging up corruption. A little incident that leads to something rotten in the state of Denmark. These people, if we give up on this idea of free press, then we're dead. Then the state can sell us any lie. And
I just have to fill in because this is so on the spot important. Because there's a survey in Sweden, and well, it's a survey, it covers several countries, and it's about faith. How do the individuals in Sweden or in these countries, I think Slovakia is in this survey as well, how much do we trust the other person, our neighbor, for instance? And Sweden and Denmark, they have the highest rates so far. For faith, 80% of the population think that the next person you can trust. Yeah, he's okay. And
thank you.
Yeah.
She doesn't look at me.
No, I shouldn't. No, Roger. Anyway, and this is how come? I think in Albania and Bulgaria it's down in 8%. So you don't trust, and in a lot of other countries, of course, you don't trust your neighbor or the state or the police. So what makes Sweden and Denmark special? Well, it's traceable back to the freedom of speech. Sweden was actually the first country in the world to have a state law, what do you say, founding law, about freedom of speech. And there was also a paragraph about transparency, that the authorities, they had to show the documents, the protocols, the judges' documents. It was open
Accountability.
to people. Accountability, thank you. My English is not transparency. And this is the key to high faith. So this is a very interesting connection.
Is this something the Swedish people are really proud of?
No, they take it for granted. The fish don't see the water they're swimming in. So this is interestingly enough.
You need immigrants to understand.
Yeah,
to understand how special it is.
In a way, actually, you do, because they do not appreciate this enough. That's my point of view.
I will try to come back when even we were still talking about the issue we had today and this evening. And Roger, you told that next year we should change why the fascism is modern. Well, if we were not talking that much about fascism this evening, what is modern today? What is the thing which is going on in Europe?
Well, you see, that is a very non-academic question, you see. That is not an insult to you. what I keep on having to defend is the idea that there is the idea that reality is plural. It's absolutely basically plural. I mean, what I keep finding is if you've never been to Italy, you know what Italy is. If you don't know the language, you have ideas. My wife, when she came to England, she found that the English loved telling her about Italy. They would say where they'd been on their holiday and what their food was like and what the government was like. And they often didn't ask her a question. And then they'd tell me, your wife's really interesting. Well, she hadn't said anything. They were saying that they were interesting. So it's easy to have a preconception about a country when you don't know it. The more you know the language and the culture and you meet people. So if you ask me now, tell me about Italy, I couldn't answer. There's an empty ignorance and there's a full ignorance. There's an ignorance which comes from the fact that it is impossible to formulate in a single phrase. Modernity now is full of the most incredible range, and it's getting more and more varied, of different phenomena. And, for example, I just live in one little place called Oxford, and there are many Oxfords. The joke is that tourists come to Oxford to see Oxford. Well, they can't see the mythical Oxford because Oxford is not a place, it's an experience, and the only way you can have that experience is to be an Oxford student. And then every Oxford student's experience is different. There's a wonderful song by Simon and Garfunkel, We've all gone to look for America. I could probably, if I spoke Slovak, spend years looking for Slovakia. And the fact is that Slovakia is all the potentials, all the different experiences, all the different histories. And there's a Roma Slovakia, and there's an immigrant Slovakia, and there's upper class and corrupt politician and idealistic politician and Catholic and Jewish and all these. And yet, there is something over this, a bit like this ceiling here. There are all these different unique individuals sitting here, and I must say I am very impressed that you came, because in England nobody would come to this. Nobody would go to listen to three strange foreigners talking about Britain. I mean, it was just impossible.
We're talking about Britain.
I mean, talking about, no, yeah.
That's so imperialist.
I meant that. If we were in Britain, this room would be empty.
Wonderful.
Okay, so what I'm saying is modernity is characterized by its extraordinary fragmentation, atomization. Precisely what the fascists wanted to stop was the breaking down of reality into lots and lots of different total, whole, integrated reality, which leads to concentration camps, it leads to obsessions with purity, it leads to controlling the press. What fascists want to do is to create a singular order, a reality. It's like me trying to get my son to tidy up his bedroom. It is impossible. I can create a mini authoritarian state, I can threaten him, I can bribe him, I can give him money, I can lock him out of his room, I can do everything. But until he himself individually looks at the room one day and say, what a mess, it is impossible. So why don't we accept the fact democracy is a mess, modernity is a mess. We have to, as it were, live with the mess like I have to live with my son's bedroom, yeah? But I still love my son. And I tell you what I love about the messiness of democracy. It is infinitely superior to some psychopathic male imposing an order on our lives. We must celebrate the messiness, tolerate other people's messiness, become anthropologists. When you meet a fanatic, don't try to kill them or argue with them. Just think, what a curious way of looking at the world. Is this really what you believe? Having a mother-in-law from another country is very, very useful if you want to do that. So I would say, I can't answer your question.
Okay.
But it's a good question. We must always keep in our hearts the fact that you think you're normal because you're you, but you're really mad, okay? And what you will encounter in other people is their madness. And if I accept you are mad and you accept I am mad, then we could have a beer together.
Good. Oxford experience. Elizabeth.
Well, again, and don't take this as criticism, but I forgot the question. It's like ages ago we heard that. No, sorry.
We tried to go back to the idea, what's modern if it's not fascism?
Well, I would say the subject for next year, I think, should be fear. Because you talked about rage, but I think fear is the dominant emotion and over Europe and in the world. And fear is contagious. And it also is very anti-intellectual. It's not good for thinking. So, and we are afraid of refugees, we're afraid of racists. A lot of people are afraid. And this is actually one of the biggest threats, I think, to democracy. Because fear makes you demand new rules, new laws, new ways of acting towards each other. So I would suggest a theme about fear.
Thank you. ABDELKADER.
Yeah. If it was up to me, which it isn't, my next offers would be a crisis in education. Because I think we're living in a time where we're talking all the time about this historical moment, but we're not teaching our children anymore what it means to be living in historical times. History was, for me, learning history was a gift for me, because I come from a very small Berber minority from Morocco. My parents are semi-literate. They don't read. We had 2 books at home: the telephone book and the Quran. And I went to school, and I was always thinking about what is identity? What is identity? Who am I? Muslim, Moroccan? In high school, I had this teacher of history, and he was a wonderful man, wonderful personality. Was very tough, but he was teaching history with a very strong idea, which was, we are all human beings that are being baked in the oven of history. Every one of us comes out of history. And when you understand that, then the gates to critical thinking, to knowledge, to relativism open up. You start to understand that human beings are weak, that we make mistakes, and that little mistakes have great consequences. And we should not be judgmental about it. The thing is to think about it, and understand, and go deeper, deeper, deeper. And he made everyone crazy in the classroom, except me. Because what he was saying to me on a different level. That's how I felt it. Like, you may think you are confused, but the whole human mankind is confused. You are also a child of history. When you find out where you come from, you will understand this and this and this and this, and you will accept the other. And this was not easy for me, because I will give you why this was not easy for me. It has to do with when you come from a minority, you feel very vulnerable because the majority is everywhere. And this creates resentment. I always understand people from minorities, even if they're right-wing or extremist. You look at them as like they're funny, but I see their vulnerability because I feel threatened. And when I was young, I have this Muslim background, and when I went to high school, the Satanic Verses came out by Salman Rushdie, and my identity was Muslim, but in a way, my identity was made by other people telling me I was a Muslim. And when the book came out, I understood it as an insult to Islam. And I hadn't read the book. The only thing I knew, I loved reading, but I thought this is a bad book because it's making my already very vulnerable position even more vulnerable. And I felt it as an insult. So one day in the classroom, the teacher said, we were starting talking about freedom of expression and the Satanic Verses. And then I said, this book is evil. The people in England, they were right, they were burning the book. And then the teacher said, why are you so angry? I said, well, because this book is attacking my religion. And then it got a very heated argument, and I was sent out of the classroom. But afterwards, I understood that it was not attack, that I didn't feel as an attack of my religion, but as an attack on my identity. Yeah. the book was about the messiness of identity, about things that religion is not something fixed, that it's not monolithic, and for me, I took it as an insult, like they were almost insulting my own father and mother. And thank God I had a teacher of history who taught me that this feeling is universal. It's a bad feeling when you can take distance from it, but you can only take distance from it when you understand it. And you accept that it is there, you have to deal with it. And that opened up. And I think when we do not teach our children what history is, the critical thinking, relativizing your own position, understanding you're not the center of the world, that when you react emotionally, there's a story behind it. I think when we don't do this, then fascism has a chance to win.
Thank you very much. We have maybe time for two questions from audience, and then I will let you to. Áno. Máme priestor asi na dve otázky.
Okay. So we have room for 2 questions, because then we continue with our program. So I think there is also a mic, yeah, it's mine, that will be traveling. And you may also ask in Slovak. They will also, so you may start ask your questions in Slovak, and our guests will stay here, so you can have also a personal encounter with them during the time when Elizabeth will be signing her books, or during the time while we are still here.
If you could say that I will sign books if anyone wants to.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Elizabeth, you've touched on an issue that I've been thinking about quite a lot in my recently, and that is freedom of speech. Where does it end? And this is a question for all of you. Where does freedom of speech end? And because what I've noticed are 2 sort of extremes that are claiming the sort of limits of freedom of speech. And one claims that there is no freedom of speech, and like you can talk about you can deny Holocaust and all these extreme sort of things. And on the other extreme is the politically correct sort of PC discourse, and I've seen violence incited by both of these things. So yeah.
I'm not sure I can try to answer the question as I see it. I think freedom of speech has a limit, and the limit is, of course, the regulations we have in our laws. We have probably here as well hate speech laws. We have I can't slander anyone, say anything about anyone else. So there are regulations, and each legal system has put the in different places, but we all have limits, so it's not completely free. And the interesting thing with this limit is that until that limit, words are words, and after that limit, they are actions, criminal actions. And this is very important because when you want to make the hate speech laws, for instance, harder and make it more difficult to say things, terrible things on the internet or whatever in social media, we're going in a different direction, I think. I think that it's a guarantee for democracy that we allow as many opinions as possible, and that we meet other opinions than the ones we have ourselves, even though we hate them. And as Salman Rushdie, to go back to him, said that your freedom of speech reaches exactly as far as to the point where my nose begins. So it's very important that words are words and actions are actions, and they're not the same. They're different things. But just when we're afraid of the climate of because this is something we've touched upon, what's happening to our language and how do we speak to each other, I am for decency, but I'm also for allowing lack of decency. And the reason for that is that, for instance, there are historians, in the Holocaust historians, that have tried to understand why did, for instance, the SS men in the Einsatzgruppen, why did they stay on murdering, committing these terrible crimes, rape, murder, you know all about it. Christopher Browning has written a fantastic book called Ordinary Men, where he explores a battalion within the Einsatzgruppe. And he realizes that they weren't especially ideological, convinced. They were ordinary men. They were, you know, postmen or students in the milk shop, and they were just ordinary men. So they weren't very Nazi, and they were not going to get punished if they said, I don't want to do this. There were actually people who said, I don't want to do this, and they went home. That was okay. So why did they continue? And his answer is that it's the group dynamic, and it's the culture where only one point of view, only one opinion is allowed. No one could differ. No one could say, I don't believe in this, you're wrong. Only one opinion was allowed. So the danger is not that we have a lot of terrible opinions around us. The danger is if we only allow one opinion, even if we think it's a good one, to exist.
Well, I love free speech as long as I can do the talking, because it's very difficult. I mean, hate speech is just everywhere now. I mean, the gates of hell have opened with Twitter and Facebook, and I live in one of the countries where Twitter is used obsessively by people, and hate speech is everywhere. I leave it to the judge to say if hate speech is inciting to violence or not. It's not up to me. I leave it to the judge, and I believe that the judicial system can cope with it, though they have problems with it. There's a big discussion. But for me, I'm very much in praise of the freedom of listening. You know, how can we, in this time of cacophony, of so many, everyone has an opinion, everyone's entitled to his own opinion, how can we again do something about this listening? How can we bring back listening back to the core of what it means to have a dialogue with someone, with yourself in the first place, but also with the other in the second place. Listening is very, very difficult nowadays. And I, as an interviewer, I have interviewed a lot of people with opinions I did not agree with, or with experiences, traumatic experiences I did not have. And I was thinking, how can I make contact with these people? How can I understand their pain, their suffering, or their hate? And the best advice a professional journalist gave me was, the first question should be why, and then just listen, and then the rest will come. And I still believe in this.
Another question from the audience, if there is any. Unfortunately, I can't see you, so please use the mic and raise your question.
Maybe bring something else into it, and that's the exposure or experience of otherness. It's been bothering me for some time because most of my adult life I believe that the exposure to otherness, bringing young people allowing them to travel, having those experiences of other countries, other cultures, can make people more tolerant. While on the other hand, I see still more affluent people traveling to other countries, still coming back being very ignorant, feeling very superior to other people, and then also seeing people leaving this country, trying to look for opportunities somewhere else in Western Europe, abroad, and then still coming back because they feel that they failed in society. They never felt that they were culturally compatible, maybe, with the culture, or that they were welcome there. And I think both of these people, that's been bothering me, because I believe that I spent most of my studies abroad, and it taught me a lot how to appreciate certain things about my country as well, and my place in the world. So what has experience of otherness brought to your lives, maybe, and how did it redefine your identity? Thanks.
Well, I'll start off as this token British person. Because I was white, male, Southern English, and we had just won the war, I experienced the world very strangely as I felt the world had been made for me. I mean, I was okay. I went to a reasonable school, and otherness I was deprived of otherness in a way, and I compensated for that not through meeting people, but by learning other languages and falling in love with the poetry of other languages. And then I made a big mistake. Because I fell in love with German poetry and French poetry, I thought that every Frenchman and every French woman especially, and every German woman, somehow contained within them the soul of the language that I had fallen in love with. And I was looking for a deep, romantic, cultural otherness that I could fall in love with in order to escape being British. And what happened was that it took me some time to realize, of course, that if I was French and I fell in love with Shakespeare, and that person then met my friends, they would be very disappointed, because ordinary people are special, but not because they contain the soul of the language or the soul of the culture. I mean, that is a nationalist delusion. So what happened was that I went through a sort of romantic involvement with literature. But at the other side of literature, when I had got the language going to the point where I could actually speak German and Italian and French, a new world opened up, which was this wonderful fascination with people who were like me and like people I knew in Britain, but they were different. And there was this beautiful tension between their familiarity as human beings and their otherness. And so because I was in a very lucky position, I wasn't a migrant, I wasn't in a country that was being occupied, I had no big traumas in my life, etc. My experience of otherness was extremely benign. However, I then went back as a historian into the countries I'd visited, France, Italy. If you go historically downwards like an archaeologist, then you start realizing that the country you think you're quite at home in has a terrible history. We say in English, skeletons in the cupboard. Even the Dutch have skeletons. Even the Swedes have skeletons. Countries that you think are really friendly and nice and the food is good and the beaches are good, you go back down, or you know a bit more about current affairs, or you know about human rights, or you know, I mean, there are businessmen in England who are going to China and coming back and saying what a wonderful place it is, but they're visiting a country where people are still being beheaded, where there are regions where there are ethnic and religious persecutions going on. In other words, if you experience Europe as a rich tourist, you could get the feeling that, modernity is fine, we're back to modernity. But so my experience of otherness is almost artificial. I've had the luxury of never really suffering for who I am. But the origin of Buddhism in the story was that the Buddha was brought up in a palace where he was protected from any confrontation with poverty, sickness, or death. But he had a strange feeling that something was being held back from him. So he took the opportunity to disguise himself as an ordinary person, went out of the gates of his palace, and there he discovered suffering, poverty, sickness, and death. And that was his revelation. Now, I had to force the revelation on myself through history and through discovering the terrible things that human beings have done, and now, thanks to the BBC and great programs, the terrible things which are going on in the world I'm in. So that is what anchors my humanity. I know that the love and comfort I have, economically and emotionally, is exceptional. That I probably represent less than 1% of the world's population in terms of the pleasure I have of being alive. And my heart bleeds for millions of people for whom the life I have is a total utopia. I've been lucky because of my gender and my lack of disability and where I was born and the moment in my own history where I was born. And I'm sure there are people sitting in this audience who don't have to go back very far, either themselves or their parents or their grandparents, and you know what I'm talking about, because this part of Europe has had a terrible history. So otherness can be a wonderful thing, and it all makes us feel what a wonderful world it is, and it's so romantic, etc. But there's a really terrifying otherness, and I think we should confront that, because what it does is create compassion, which comes from the Latin for suffering with other people. And what the world needs far more than just love, which is often a euphemism for sex, is compassion. And if we could have compassion, then the otherness of other people is no longer threatening, and we start really becoming fully human. Thank you. Whoops, done it.
You want to answer, or it's okay for you?
Well, it depends how much time we have.
Maybe 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, I think otherness, I start to think about what you just said is sort of a universal, preaching universality, and what is, there's a Swedish poem that says, what is in the bottom of you, this is very clumsy translating, but what's in the bottom of you is also in the bottom of others. It's sort of the core in you is also the core in others. And what is cattle in you is the next, is also cattle in others. So choose the low road, choose the core, follow the core and not the cattle. So this is a terrible translation of a fantastic poem. But I just want to say from my very old perspective that otherness has also changed its meaning during my lifetime. When I grew up, I wanted to belong. I didn't know what I wanted to belong to. I wanted to be tall and have blonde hair and look like, you know, ABBA, the Agneta in ABBA. That's right. How did you know?
Oh, how did Gimme.
Yeah, but then it changed, and I got to be identified with the stranger in myself, feeling a stranger all the time, wherever I was. Didn't matter really. I could connect to individuals, but I couldn't connect to other things. And then I learned to live with that, and now I'm a writer, and that is the next step in this process, being at home in my work and in the language. So otherness has changed its meaning through my life, and maybe in 20 years it'll have another meaning. But at the moment, otherness is identified by, you know, people who don't think language is important or things like that. Other things. It's not connected to nationality or.
Thank you. ABDELKADER, as you love Twitter as much as you told, you have this Twitter answer to your disposition.
Yeah, 140.
Yes.
Well,
no, it's 240, right? Right.
It's double.
It's double. They doubled for you, right?
Okay, so there's room for Franz Kafka. I always, when it comes to loss, I always think of my parents, because they left their own country, they went to a different culture, and they lost everything. They lost the organic connection to their family, and I benefit from that. And I am deeply grateful to them. And there's no way I can repay this. They changed my life and the life of my children forever. And this gives me a deep sense of melancholy. And when you grow up as an immigrant son, I relate very much to you, because I also wanted to be blonde and look like Marco van Basten, the football player. But no, I didn't have this. I didn't have this because I was lousy at football. But you look at the world and you think that the world is perfect and you are imperfect. And this bothers you. And it brings the quote of Franz Kafka, who once said, "There is hope, but not for me." You know, and so that's like the immigrant experience in one Kafka quote. There's hope, but not for me.
Thank you very much. Elisabeth, Åsbrink, ABDELKADER, BENALI a Roger Griffin. Ešte predtým, ako sa rozlúčime,
Before we shall leave this room, Elizabeth will be here at a corner with the Absynt publishing house, and she will be there to sign your books. And before we do that, I think we have still one guest more. Zuzana, are you here? Zuzana wants to read something to say. It's something we need to hear tonight. At the same time, I want to thank, as I said, our guests will be here for some time, and they will be happy to talk to you. I believe I haven't forgot anything. Maybe one thing on 14th of March, you don't have to celebrate it, you don't have to reject it, but please don't forget this date, because forgetting is the worst that can happen to us. I want to thank all our guests, all you for coming, Central European Forum, to all our supporters. Thank you, a big thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne Marte za toto pozvanie
I would like to thank Marta for this invitation, and I would like to inform you about a call. Dozens of people prepare the last days. Marta has surprised me by inviting me here, but I won't take too much of your time. We had the feeling, like people working in the NGOs and in the public sector, we had the feeling that when the country shakes in its roots, like what we experienced here in Slovakia 2 weeks ago, then people who enjoy trust should support the good vibrations in society and should try to define what should happen now, so that the terrific crime we experienced, the murder of an investigative journalist and his friend, has a meaning, so that it is not a wound with us all the time.
That's why we are preparing an appeal, a petition that will be open for signature. We will appreciate everyone who will sign it. We are supporting those who rally, who demonstrate. We keep fingers crossed for them to continue, especially tonight after this evening's news, because we believe this is our fundamental right. This is not a coup d'etat. In our petition, in our appeal, we also say that what is desperately needed is to investigate the murders. To that end, the people who are in the positions who have dismantled our institutions, who let the rich and the powerful ones to get away from justice. So that's why we would like to come up with a few requirements that we, civic society, should stand for. So we require the resignation of the famous Minister of Interior. However, he should not be replaced by a puppet. If it's just a puppet, we will get a person there who would be in an untenable conflict of interest. You know that Kuciak was working on cases very close to political power, so these people would do everything in their power if that investigation threatens them, so they would frustrate that investigation. At the same time, we are asking for something new in Slovakia, so that Prosecutor's General's office should ensure a special supervision of the investigation through an international team, as well as accepted moral authorities whom we have in Slovakia. And we also require the resignation of the police President Gašpan and Special Prosecutor Kovačič, who's somehow stepped aside as if they have not contributed to the current situation. Representing NGOs that have been dealing with corruption and anti-corruption for a long time, we will try to come up with a set of measures, actions in a very short period of time in order to heal the wound, so that we could get our institutions back into our hands to make them strong again. Thank you very much for letting me speak to you. Thank you, Marta, and we will appreciate all your support. Thank you, Susanna of the Fair Play Alliance. So now I can invite you to the signing of the book by Elizabeth. Is this something different? Oh, there is some meeting going on the margins. So I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you for coming.